You talk a lot about how logic will determine that Christianity is the answer. What what verse, what thing from text, what piece of evidence or advice or statement have you both made that you found to be the most effective at converting people?
When Jesus is coming to heal Jairus' daughter, Jairus doesn't know what to do with Jesus. He's heard that he's a miracle worker and healer. But Jesus talks about, hey, believe that this will happen. And Jairus says, I do believe, but help my unbelief. So for me, I want to come check this Jesus out. See, everyone in the Bible, even doubting Thomas, or for example, Philip and Nathanael in John chapter 1, Philip doesn't bash Nathanael over the head, neither does Jesus. Philip says to Nathanael, come and see. Jesus says, come and see, come and check me out. Don't just believe in me with blind faith. But that Jairus passage has always helped me because I've been a doubter. I've been a doubting Thomas my whole life, probably more so than my brothers and my parents. And yet that passage alone is, Jesus is saying, hey, doubt all you want, but please come and check me out and keep checking me out. But check out the alternatives too.
Maybe I've miscommunicated. This would be a classic example of this whole tricky issue of communication. No, you don't just logically come to Christ, come to faith. All right? You can't logically prove God. You can't logically prove Christ. All right? But logic is involved. Thinking is involved. What I mean is this, Jack. Jack, this pink elephant right here on my right hand, this pink elephant has brought my life meaning and purpose and joy and hope. I really hope you'll believe in this pink elephant. I hope you'll say, really, Cliff, what on earth is the evidence that the pink elephant is really here? And if I say to you, Jack, I'll pay you $1 million if you believe in this pink elephant, although because you want the $1 million, you might say, okay, Cliff, I believe there's a pink elephant. You know that your mind will not allow you to believe in the pink elephant here, because there is not a shred of evidence that the pink elephant is really here. So when we say that logic is important, what we mean is your mind will not allow you to believe something that is not supported by evidence, that is contradictory to the evidence. Your mind won't let you do that. I don't care how much money I offer, you know very well that when you walk out of here, you're saying, Cliff was nutso. There's no pink elephant on his right hand. So reason is important. I mean, think about it. Where does reason come from? If there is no God, reason comes from non-reason. Why would you trust the thoughts of a monkey? Well, I probably wouldn't, Cliff. Good. But if my mind is simply a highly sophisticated monkey's mind, why do you trust the thoughts of your own mind? Now, in a sophisticated way, that's called epistemological nihilism. And it's basically the idea that why do you trust rational thinking if rational thinking comes from the irrational or the non-rational, or just a monkey? The reason I trust my rational mind is because I believe that my rational mind comes from a rational being, a creator, who gave me this rational mind. And that's what Einstein was enthralled by. One of the biggest miracles is that our minds have the ability to get in touch with reality. Why is there not a total disconnect between my rational mind and reality? And Einstein was enthralled by that. So that is what I meant when I say logic is important. It's not that you can logically prove God, but if you think clearly, and when I say think clearly, I don't just mean some philosophical argument for God's existence. When you look at your experience of life, Jesus makes far more sense than any of the options. What do I mean? Well, I mean by that, when you get to know Graham well enough, you know that Graham's a great guy. You also know that there's some things about Graham that are questionable, and Graham will find out the same thing about you, okay? And you'll find out the same thing about me. You've been very kind, and you've talked about how nice guys we are, but I can promise you he's a sinner, and I can promise you I'm a sinner. And you get to know us well enough, and there's going to be some selfishness, some greed. That's going to be embarrassing, all right? Now, when you look at the worldview that best describes how you can do great things and you can do some really warped things, Jesus answers that question. In other words, he describes reality as you experience it in a really profound way. Does that make sense?
He can describe it, but he still doesn't necessarily it's immaterial.
Yeah.
And it's hard to adopt as someone who's open to it, but just skeptical, something that can't be touched, it can't be seen, it can't be any of that. And
Yep.
sure, humans have a natural inclination towards spirituality, absolutely, because we do ask the question, why do we exist? And maybe some people get the answer when they have a child because like, well, I exist to reproduce and to have a family and this and that. I like to think that it's more so in the wise words of Tom Bilyeu. He said this, which I love Tom Bilyeu. He said, I exist to increase human flourishing and decrease human suffering. And so, sure, the Bible might be a great representation of that set of values. And it's a great interpretation. It was very well ahead of its time, and it's very intelligent and this and that. It's so hard to trust something like that when you also have communities that get together and they increase human flourishing and decrease human suffering. And, we have a natural disposition, I like to think, towards a little bit of good, maybe 51-49, and over an a big enough expanded time horizon, then that will, increase flourishing and decrease suffering.
But who's to say, again, what is good if there is no God? Because back to Hinduism,
Would be
for example,
flourishing as opposed to suffering.
Well, but so then he's going to say that in Hinduism, when the husband dies and the wife is burned to death and her body is put on her husband's in a mass grave, they say that's a very good thing. So that's not flourishing for the woman, obviously, as we define it, but they would define it as, no, that's good. They need to go into the afterlife together. So for whoever he is, I believe he's ushering in the Christian perspective on we are created in God's image, and God has created us to flourish and to help others flourish. And destruction, entropy, evil, those are all real intangibles, immaterial. And if you have the intangibles and immaterial, then that's going to push you to some type of spiritual realm and reality. And so what explains that spiritual realm and reality? Well, if there's only physical reality, you can't explain. That's the atheistic worldview. That's in no way going to connect and say, wow, there is a spiritual reality. But we all know there is a spiritual reality or something immaterial, for example, that you were communicating, which is, hey, look, the biggest questions of life are, where do we come from? What is our purpose? And where are we going? Biggest questions. At some point, every single human being that I know at least is going to ask those questions. So the typical college student is asking those questions, but there are definitely some who are saying, no, I'm just going to get through school right now. I could care less about those big questions. But they're going to have to ask them eventually. And so back to that person, it's equally valid and okay in my mind if there is no objective good and objective meaning to say, well, who are you to tell me that flourishing and versus destruction and not flourishing, why is that innately good or better if there is no God? Why in the world, if I'm sitting on the top of a building and decide to throw my baby off of the top of that building, if there is no God, who am I to say that that's bad? But if there is a God and I'm throwing my baby off the top of a building, then that's morally, objectively evil and wrong if there is a God.
Another way to look at it is, you're a really nice guy and you're an agnostic. And I would argue the reason you're a really nice guy is because you have a conscience given you by God, and your conscience and your rational mind enable you to understand this is really good and this is really evil. But the point we're trying to make, Jack, is there is no basis for an objective good or an objective evil if there is no mind, no God prior to the human mind. Because if there is no God, then we create good and evil, and they're not objective, they're subjective, which means you might define flourishing today as giving him a meal. You're going to buy him dinner tonight.
That'd be nice, Jack.
I'll put it on the company.
That's a great idea.
Thanks a lot.
I like you, man. I appreciate that.
But if tomorrow you say that good is to stick a knife in Graham's back, you're not wrong. You're not objectively wrong, because right and wrong are just a relative, subjective taste.
But you could, across enough people with the law of big numbers, get 7 billion answers to the question, is it a good or a bad thing to stab somebody?
Good.
Kill them. Then you could determine, even barring, I like to think, Judeo-Christian values,
Yep.
if you just ask people that have no idea, people of tribes, and you're like, okay, and they're like, well, why? What did he do? And they're trying to justify it. They have some sort of moral compass aside from, okay, it sounds like I'm saying something that...
That's really good.
And that's what I'm saying. Is
That's
that
exactly,
if
you're absolutely right.
take enough data points, it might be 51-49.
But you see, the point, you're absolutely right. Around the world, it looks like we're reading off the same sheet music when it comes to, sticking knives in people's backs is not too good. There are some unfortunate aberrations from that. But the question then is, where does that understanding come from? That indeed murder, adultery are really evil.
Evolutionarily speaking, you could say that humans have learned that we work better as a community and a rising tide lifts all boats. And so if you help out somebody, then you're bound to be better off. And I think humans, yes, while we are naturally a little bit selfish, I don't think being selfish is a bad thing. And I think that you can be selfish and help yourself because that's kind of a prerequisite to helping other people. And then eventually, if you're in a better spot, like it helps the community and increases flourishing. And so we've learned, because we're smart enough, fortunately, that that's the way to do it.
But just don't help somebody outside of your tribe.
Well,
That is selfish because it's hurting your tribe.
if they're in direct opposition to your tribe, but if they're kind of just existing, then expansion of the tribe is never a bad idea. Like you could. This is very hypothetically speaking.
Yeah,
very
no,
theoretical.
it's
I'm
a
just
good
saying.
one.
I'm just
Yeah.
trying to like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think we have so much tribalism in our nation today, and that's only growing. The extremism and saying, oh, if you're a Democrat and I'm going to completely look down on a Republican, or a Republican is going to completely look down on a Democrat. And we're going to shout over each other. We're going to totally disagree on what is morally, objectively right or wrong because so much of it has become subjective. And so much of it is based off of just emotion. I'm just going to emote and say, this is my view on things, and you better get on board with my tribe or you're done with it. So when you have moral objectivity, which is immaterial, has to be given by something spiritual outside of the physical. Well, now all of a sudden you're saying, okay, we can speak the same language. What is morally right and wrong? Now, we may have differences on small ethics and that sort of thing. But if you're going to take it from you scratch my back and I'll scratch your back, yes, innately that is selfish, because we have so many people in this day and age now saying, well, you didn't really scratch my back, so I'm done with you. I mean, I am done with you. And that yet again shows that especially our generation is living for self. It's all about self-assertion versus sacrifice for others. Because if I'm truly living based off of this evolutionary cycle, again, it's strong eat the weak, you're in my way, and so I'm going to dominate you in some kind of way because it's all about me.